Rain falls on a quiet suburban street as Officer David Carter approaches a speeding car. It should be just another routine traffic stop, but nothing about this night will be routine. Because there, in the back seat, sits a little girl whose face he's seen in his dreams every night for 2 years. The same deep brown eyes, the same tiny birthmark beneath her left eye, even the same purple beads in her braided hair. His daughter Maya. But Maya died in a bridge accident. Her body was never found. Her death certificate sits in his desk drawer at home. So who is this child? The nervous driver calls her his niece. But why does she clutch a stuffed rabbit identical to the one they found in the river that tragic night? Why does she look at Officer Carter with eyes full of fear and something else? Something that looks like recognition? As lightning splits the sky, one question thunders through his mind. What if everything he believed about his daughter's death was a lie? What if the accident that tore his family apart was no accident at all? Before we uncover the truth behind this father's greatest nightmare, drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from today. The soft melodies of Stevie Wonder drifted through Officer David Carter's patrol car as he cruised down Maple Street. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of amber and purple, casting long shadows across perfectly manicured lawns. His dark fingers absently brushed against the small, worn piece of paper hanging from his rearview mirror. A child's drawing of a rainbow, signed in crooked letters. "Love you, Daddy, Maya." David had considered taking it down countless times over the past 2 years. His therapist suggested it might help him move forward, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. That rainbow was his last physical connection to Maya, aside from the memories that haunted his dreams. The radio crackled, to life breaking through his reverie. "Dispatch to Unit 247. We've got reports of a silver sedan speeding through the residential area near Pine Grove Elementary. Multiple calls from concerned residents." David's hand moved to the radio. "Unit 247 responding. I'm 3 blocks away." His deep voice carried the steady professionalism he'd mastered over 15 years on the force, even as his heart clenched at the mention of Pine Grove Elementary. Maya's old school. He turned onto Cedar Lane, where young families were just finishing their dinner routines. Through windows, he caught glimpses of normal lives unfolding. Parents helping with homework, kids arguing over television shows, the ordinary moments he used to take for granted. The silver sedan appeared in his view, moving too fast for a residential zone. Its rear bumper was dented, the paint job faded and peeling. David flipped on his lights, and the car continued for another block before finally pulling over, its right tire scraping against the curb. Something felt off. David couldn't explain it, but 15 years of police work had taught him to trust his instincts. He radioed in his location and the vehicle's plate number, then stepped out of his cruiser, his hand instinctively resting on his holstered weapon. The evening air carried the scent of freshly cut grass and approaching rain. David approached the vehicle, his footsteps measured and deliberate. The driver was a middle-aged white man with thinning hair and a worn leather jacket, his hands gripping the steering wheel too tightly. "License and registration, please," David said, his flashlight beam sweeping across the interior. The man fumbled with his wallet, his movements jerky and uncertain. That's when David's light reached the back seat. Time stopped. The world narrowed to a single point of focus. A young girl, maybe 8 or 9, with carefully braided cornrows adorned with purple beads, Maya's favorite color. She wore a pink sweater that seemed too big for her frame, and in her lap sat a stuffed rabbit, worn and gray but unmistakable in its familiarity. David's breath caught in his throat. The resemblance was impossible, yet undeniable. The same heart-shaped face, the same warm brown complexion, and there, just below her left eye, a small birthmark shaped like a teardrop. Maya's birthmark. His hand began to shake, the flashlight beam dancing erratically across the interior. The girl met his gaze for a brief moment before looking away, her fingers tightening around the stuffed rabbit. "Sir?" The driver's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Is everything all right?" David forced himself to focus, to be professional, even as his heart thundered in his chest. "The girl," he managed, his voice rougher than he intended. "Is she your daughter?" The man's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed. "My niece. I'm taking her to visit her mother in Riverside." "Your niece," David repeated, studying the man's face. Sweat beaded on the driver's forehead despite the cool evening air. "What's her name?" "Sarah," the man answered quickly. Too quickly. "Sarah Johnson." David's training kicked in, years of experience noting the signs of deception, the nervous tapping of fingers against the steering wheel. The way the man's eyes kept darting to the rearview mirror. The girl's obvious discomfort. "How old is she?" David asked, keeping his voice steady even as his mind raced through possibilities he didn't dare consider. The man hesitated. 9. Maya would be 9 now. "And what school does she attend?" Another pause. "Look, officer, I was speeding, I admit it. Can't you just write me a ticket so we can get going? It's getting late." David's free hand moved to his radio. "Dispatch, Unit 247 requesting backup at my location." He kept his eyes on the driver, watching as the man's expression shifted from nervous to afraid. The girl in the back seat hugged the stuffed rabbit closer to her chest. David's mind flashed to the identical toy they'd found near the bridge after the accident, soaked through and mud-stained. Maya had never gone anywhere without that rabbit. She'd named it Mr. Hoppy, and his wife Leah had sewn a tiny purple ribbon around its neck. "Step out of the vehicle, sir," David ordered, his voice carrying an authority that surprised even him. The man's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Officer, please. We're already running late. Step out of the vehicle now." The man's jaw clenched, but he slowly reached for the door handle. David maintained his position, hyper-aware of both the driver and the girl in the back seat. She hadn't spoken a word, hadn't made a sound, but her eyes... God, her eyes were exactly like Maya's. As the driver emerged from the car, David noticed more details that set off warning bells. The man's shoes were expensive, contrasting sharply with his worn clothing. A small tattoo peeked out from under his sleeve, partially covered as if he'd tried to hide it. "Put your hands on the hood of the car," David instructed, his police training warring with the emotional storm brewing inside him. The man complied, but David could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he kept glancing toward the woods that bordered the street. "Sir, I'm going to need to see some identification for the child," David said, fighting to keep his voice professional, "and I'd like to speak with her." The man's shoulders stiffened. "She doesn't talk much. She's shy around strangers." David moved toward the back door, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. The girl watched him through the window, her brown eyes wide with a mixture of fear and something else, something that made his paternal instincts scream. Just as he reached for the door handle, the driver moved. It was subtle, a slight shift of weight, a tensing of muscles, but David recognized the signs. Years of experience had taught him to read body language, to anticipate when someone was about to run or fight. "Don't," David warned. But the man was already moving, shoving away from the car and breaking into a sprint toward the woods. David's training took over. He grabbed his radio even as he started to pursue. Suspect fleeing on foot, heading east toward the Pine Grove woods, requesting immediate backup and units to secure the vehicle. There's a child in the back seat. The chase was brief. The man might have had desperation on his side, but David had something stronger. The possibility, however remote, that the girl in that car was his daughter. He tackled the suspect at the edge of the woods, both of them rolling in the fallen leaves, before David pinned him, quickly securing his hands behind his back. "You're making a mistake," the man gasped as David hauled him to his feet. "I told you she's my niece." "Then you won't mind proving that," David replied, marching him back toward the patrol car. In the distance, he could hear sirens approaching. His backup would be here soon. The girl was still in the back seat, watching the scene unfold with those familiar brown eyes. Those eyes, Maya's eyes, followed their movement as David secured the suspect in his patrol car. Then, finally, he could return to the sedan. He opened the back door slowly, crouching down to be at eye level with the girl. Up close, the resemblance was even more striking. Every detail, from the way her small hands clutched the rabbit to the slight tremble of her lower lip. It was all Maya. "Hi there," he said softly, fighting to keep his voice steady. "I'm Officer Carter, but you can call me David. Can you tell me your name?" The girl clutched her stuffed rabbit tighter but remained silent. David noticed her hands trembling. "That's a nice rabbit you have there," he continued gently. "I had a daughter who had one just like it. She called him Mr. Hoppy because he had a special purple ribbon around his neck, just like yours does." The girl's eyes widened slightly at the name, and David's heart nearly stopped, but she quickly looked away, her shoulders hunching as if trying to make herself smaller. More patrol cars arrived, their lights painting the street in alternating red and blue. David could hear his colleagues securing the scene, but it all felt distant, unreal. His entire world had narrowed to this moment, this girl, this impossible possibility. He reached slowly into his pocket and withdrew his wallet. Inside was a photograph he carried everywhere. Maya on her 7th birthday, her fi. Cornrows decorated with purple beads, wearing a princess crown and holding Mr. Hoppy. He held it where the girl could see it. "This is my daughter, Maya," he said, his voice thick with emotion. She went missing 2 years ago. Everyone told me she was gone, but I never..." He had to pause, collecting himself. "I never stopped looking for her." The girl's eyes moved to the photograph, and for a moment, just a moment, something flickered across her face. Recognition? Fear? Hope? David couldn't tell. "If you're scared, that's okay," he continued. "But I promise you, you're safe now. No one is going to hurt you. And if you are, if you're who I think you might be..." His voice broke slightly. "I want you to know that I never stopped loving you. Never stopped searching. Not for one single day." A tear rolled down the girl's cheek, falling silently onto the stuffed rabbit in her lap. She opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it again, her eyes darting fearfully toward the patrol car where the driver sat. "It's okay," David reassured her. "He can't hurt you anymore. You're safe." Thunder rumbled in the distance, and a few drops of rain began to fall. David thought of another rainy night, 2 years ago, when his world had fallen apart. But maybe, just maybe, this rain would bring something back instead of taking it away. The girl looked at him again, and this time, she didn't look away. The growing darkness, with rain starting to fall and police lights casting their colored glow, father and daughter stared at each other across an impossible gulf of time and trauma. And somewhere in those warm brown eyes, David saw a spark of recognition that made his heart soar and break all at once. She still hadn't spoken, still hadn't confirmed or denied anything. But as David knelt there in the gathering storm, he knew, with absolute certainty, that his search was finally over. Maya had come home. 2 years earlier, laughter echoed through the Carter family's backyard. The summer sun cast a golden glow over David and Maya as they stood before their wooden fence, paintbrushes in hand. Maya's tongue poked out in concentration as she carefully added another stripe to their rainbow masterpiece. "Daddy, you're going outside the lines again," Maya giggled, her purple beads clicking together as she shook her head. At 7 years old, she took her art very seriously, especially when it came to rainbows. David chuckled, deliberately making an exaggerated swooping motion with his brush. "Oh no, look what I did now," he exclaimed, earning another burst of laughter from his daughter. "You're silly," Maya said, reaching up to fix his mistake with her smaller brush. Her dark eyes sparkled with joy as she worked, reminding David so much of her mother, Leah. The afternoon sun warmed their skin as they worked side by side, Maya humming along to the Stevie Wonder song playing from David's phone. These were the moments he lived for, the simple, perfect times when nothing mattered except making his little girl smile. "Daddy?" Maya's voice took on a more serious tone as she dipped her brush in the blue paint. "Yes, baby girl? You protect people, right? That's what police officers do?" David set down his brush, giving her his full attention. "That's right. We help keep people safe." Maya bit her lip, a habit she'd picked up from her mother. Will you always protect me too? David knelt beside her, paint-stained hands resting on her small shoulders. Always, Maya. No matter what happens, I will always protect you. That's a promise. Maya wrapped her arms around his neck, getting paint on his shirt. I love you, Daddy. I love you too, Princess. More than all the colors. In every rainbow. Later that evening, after Maya had gone to bed, David found Leah in their bedroom, folding laundry with sharp, angry movements. The tension between them had been building for weeks, maybe months. You missed her dance practice again, Leah said, without looking up, her voice tight with disappointment. David sighed, running a hand over his face. There was an emergency call. I couldn't just... There's always an emergency call, David. Leah finally turned to face him, her beautiful features drawn with worry and frustration. Do you know what Maya told me today? She said she understood why you couldn't come because other people needed you more. The words hit David like a physical blow. That's not true. Nothing is more important than Maya. Then show her that. Leah's voice cracked with emotion. Show her that she matters more than the job. Because right now, all she sees is her daddy missing every important moment in her life. David moved to embrace his wife, but she stepped back, holding up a hand. I'm not asking you to quit being a police officer. I'm just asking you to find a balance before it's too late. The argument ended there, unresolved like so many others. They went to bed that night with an ocean of unsaid words between them, neither knowing that their time together was running out. The following Friday started like any other day. David had worked a double shift and was exhausted, but he'd promised Maya he'd pick her up from school. As he pulled up to Pine Grove Elementary, he saw her waiting on the steps, bouncing with excitement. Daddy! Maya ran to the car, her backpack bouncing against her back, Mr. Hoppy clutched in one hand. Guess what? There's going to be an art contest next week. Mrs. Johnson says we can paint anything we want, and the winner gets their picture, hung in the hallway forever. That's amazing, baby girl. David helped her buckle her seatbelt, making sure Mr. Hoppy was secured too. What are you going to paint? A giant rainbow, Maya declared. But not just any rainbow. This one's going to have magic clouds and flying unicorns and... She continued chattering all the way home, her enthusiasm infectious. Will you help me practice this weekend? She asked as they pulled into their driveway. Of course I will. We can... David's phone buzzed with a message from work. Another emergency. Another choice between duty and family. Maya saw his expression change, and her smile dimmed slightly. It's okay, Daddy. I know you have to go help people. No, David said firmly, remembering Leah's words. Not this time. This weekend is for you, Princess. We're going to paint the best rainbow anyone has ever seen. Maya's face lit up and she hugged him tight. Promise? Promise. But promises, David would learn, were fragile things. The next morning, Leah suggested taking Maya to visit her grandparents while David caught up on sleep. You're exhausted, she insisted. Get some rest and we'll be back before dinner. David kissed them both goodbye, breathing in Maya's familiar scent of coconut hair oil and baby powder. Be careful, he said to Leah. They're saying it might rain later. We'll be fine, Leah assured him, adjusting Maya's purple hair beads one last time. Love you. Love you more, Maya called out as they headed to the car. Those were the last words David would hear from either of them. He woke to the sound of his phone ringing. Rain hammered against the windows as he fumbled for the device, his heart dropping when he saw his mother-in-law's name on the screen. David? Her voice was strange, choked with tears. There's been an accident. The bridge. Leah's car. The rest was a blur of sirens and flashing lights, of rain-slicked roads and desperate prayers. By the time David reached the scene, they had already pulled Leah's body from the water. But Maya was nowhere to be found. The current was too strong, they told him as he fought to dive into the river himself. With this rain, the water level's rising too fast. We have to wait. But David couldn't wait. He spent hours in the rain, searching the riverbanks, calling Maya's name until his voice gave out. They found Mr. Hoppy the next day, tangled in some branches downstream, his purple ribbon torn and muddy. Days turned into weeks. David led search parties, put up flyers, followed every possible lead. He took leave from work, spending every waking moment looking for his daughter. The community rallied around him, organizing volunteers, sharing Maya's photo across social media. Sometimes, the grief counselor told him gently, accepting loss is the only way to survive it. But David couldn't accept it. Not when they never found Maya's body. Not when his heart screamed that she was still out there somewhere, needing him to protect her like he'd promised. Nights were the worst. He'd sit in Maya's room, surrounded by her drawings and stuffed animals, tortured by memories of moments he'd missed and promises he hadn't kept. The rainbow they'd painted together faded in the weather, but David couldn't bring himself to paint over it. One night, about 6 months after the accident, David found himself pulling out the case files. Again, something about the witness statements had always bothered him. A black SUV seen near the bridge. Tire marks that didn't match Leah's car. Small details that others dismissed, but that gnawed at his investigator's instincts. But whenever he tried to pursue these leads, his colleagues gently steered him away. Don't do this to yourself, they'd say. Don't let grief create conspiracy theories. Maybe they were right. Maybe he was seeing patterns that didn't exist because the truth was too painful to bear. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw Maya's face, heard her asking if he would always protect her. The official search was called off after 3 months. The death certificates were issued. Leah Carter, loving wife and mother. Maya Carter, beloved daughter. But David never stopped searching. He returned to work eventually, throwing himself into his duties with a new intensity. Every traffic stop, every domestic call, every missing person report, they all became potential connections to Maya. His colleagues worried about him, but they didn't understand. They hadn't made a promise to their 7-year-old daughter, and then failed to keep it. The seasons changed. Maya's 8th birthday came and went. David sat alone in their backyard, staring at the faded rainbow on the fence, holding a cupcake with an unlit candle. He sang "Happy Birthday" softly, his voice breaking on every other word. Their house began to feel like a museum of loss. Maya's school backpack still hung by the door. Her toothbrush remained in its holder next to the sink. The art supplies for the contest she never got to enter sat untouched on her desk. David couldn't bear to move any of it, as if disturbing these artifacts of their life together would somehow make her loss more final. Leah's parents tried to help him move forward. They invited him to dinner, encouraged him to pack away some of Maya's things, suggested he might consider dating again. But how could he explain that moving forward felt like betrayal? That every smile, every moment of happiness was tainted by guilt? The grief counselor said this was normal. Survivor's guilt, she called it. You're punishing yourself for something that wasn't your fault. But it was his fault, wasn't it? If he hadn't been so tired from working double shifts, maybe he would have gone with them that day. If he'd been a better husband, a more present father, maybe Leah wouldn't have felt the need to take that drive in the rain. The what-ifs haunted him endlessly. What if he'd checked the weather more carefully? What if he'd insisted they wait until the rain stopped? What if he'd been there to protect them like he'd promised? Work became his only solace. On patrol, he could focus on helping others, on keeping his promise to protect and serve, even if he'd failed to protect the ones who mattered most. His colleagues noticed the change in him, the way he approached each case with an almost obsessive thoroughness, the way he never gave up on any investigation, no matter how cold the trail grew. Some days were harder than others. The days when he'd see a little girl with beaded braids playing in a park. The days when Stevie Wonder would play on the radio. The days when the rain would fall just like it had that terrible afternoon. But the hardest days were the quiet ones, when the weight of absence became too heavy to bear. When he'd catch himself setting 3 places at the dinner table instead of 1. When he'd hear a child's laughter in the grocery store and turn, expecting to see Maya running toward him with Mr. Hoppy in her arms. The rainbow on the fence continued to fade, but David couldn't bring himself to repaint it. That was their rainbow, his and Maya's. and touching it felt like erasing one of the last physical connections he had to her. Instead, he'd sit in the backyard for hours, remembering her determined expression as she carefully painted each stripe, the way she'd scold him for going outside the lines. Time passed, but the pain didn't dull. It just changed shape, becoming less like a knife to the heart and more like a constant, hollow ache. David learned to function around it, to carry his grief like a second shadow. He went through the motions of living: work, eat, sleep, repeat. But something essential had been torn from him that rainy afternoon. And now, 2 years later, watching the rain begin to fall outside a stopped car with a frightened girl, in the back seat, David felt all those memories crash over him like waves. The girl's eyes, Maya's eyes, held a universe of questions he was afraid to answer. But for the first time since that terrible day, he felt something he'd almost forgotten: hope. The sound of approaching sirens pulled him back to the present moment. The girl, his Maya, clutched Mr. Hoppy tighter, and David made a silent promise. This time, he wouldn't fail to protect her. This time, he would keep his word. Because sometimes, just sometimes, the universe offers second chances. And David, Carter intended to make the most of his red and blue lights painted the quiet suburban street as backup units arrived at the scene. Officer Sarah Thompson, David's longtime partner, was first to pull up, taking in the situation with experienced eyes. The suspect sat handcuffed in the back of David's patrol car, while David knelt beside the silver sedan, speaking softly to the girl inside. "David," Sarah called out, approaching carefully. She'd been there through everything: the accident, the endless searches, the sleepless nights. She knew what Maya's loss had done to him. "What do we have?" David stood slowly, his dark eyes never leaving the girl in the back seat. "I need you to run full background on our suspect. Something's not right here, Sarah. This girl..." His voice caught. "She looks exactly like Maya, down to the birthmark." Sarah's hand tightened on her belt. She'd seen what grief could do to good cops, how it could make them see things that weren't there. But she trusted David's instincts. "I'll call it in. You want child services?" "Not yet." David glanced at the suspect in his patrol car. "First, I want to know exactly who he is and what he's doing with this girl." More units arrived, securing the perimeter. Detective Marcus Williams, a veteran of the Missing Persons Unit, took charge of processing the suspect's vehicle. David watched as they photographed the interior, documented the contents, collected evidence. "Officer Carter," Marcus called out, holding up a small backpack found in the trunk. "You need to see this." Inside the backpack were several sets of children's clothing, all different sizes. Nothing that seemed to belong to the girl currently in the car. There were also multiple prepaid phones, a stack of cash, and, most disturbing, a collection of ID cards with different names but similar photos. "This isn't his first time," Marcus said quietly. "These are transport markers. We see them in trafficking cases." David's blood ran cold. He turned back to the sedan, where the girl, Maya, still sat clutching her stuffed rabbit. She watched them with wary eyes, her small body tense as if ready to flee at any moment. Sarah returned from running the suspect's information. "David, we've got multiple alerts on this guy. Different names, but the physical description matches. He's been linked to at least 3 other missing children cases in the past year." "Get him to interrogation," David ordered, his voice tight with controlled anger. "I want everything: where he's been, who he works for, every child he's ever touched." "David," Sarah said gently, "if this is connected to Maya, I know." He took a deep breath, steadying himself. "But right now, that little girl needs us to be professional. We do this by the book." The suspect was transferred to another unit for transport to the station. As they loaded him into the car, he called out, "You're making a mistake. I told you, she's my niece." David ignored him, focusing instead on the girl. She hadn't spoken a word since they'd found her, but her eyes followed everything, missing nothing, just like Maya used to do. Detective Williams approached with a female officer, Lisa Chen. "We should get her to the station too. Lisa can drive her." The girl's eyes widened in fear at the suggestion of being separated from David. She gripped Mr. Hoppy tighter, shaking her head violently. "I'll take her," David said firmly. "She trusts me, or at least she's not afraid of me. Let's not traumatize her more than necessary." Marcus looked like he might object, but Sarah stepped in. "I'll ride with them. We'll follow protocol, but we do this carefully." The girl watched this exchange intently. When David opened her door, she didn't resist, but she didn't let go of her stuffed rabbit either. He noticed her hands trembling. As he helped her out of the car, "It's okay," he said softly. "You're safe now. No one's going to hurt you anymore." She looked up at him with those familiar brown eyes, and for a moment, David saw a flicker of something. Recognition? Memory? Cross her face, but she remained silent. At the station, they set up in the special interviewing room designed for children. The walls were painted in soft colors, with comfortable furniture and toys scattered around. A trained child psychologist, Dr. Rachel Martinez, waited to assist with the interview. "Hi there," Dr. Martinez said warmly as the girl entered. "I love your rabbit. Does he have a name?" The girl clutched the stuffed animal closer but didn't respond. She stayed close to David, almost hiding behind his leg. "Would you like to sit down?" Dr. Martinez gestured to a comfortable couch. "Maybe draw a picture while we talk?" After a moment's hesitation, the girl moved to the couch, perching on the edge like she might need to run at any moment. David sat nearby, close enough to reassure but not so close as to crowd her. "Can you tell me your name?" Dr. Martinez asked gently. The girl's eyes darted to David, then back to the doctor. Her lips moved slightly, but no sound came out. "It's okay if you're not ready to talk," Dr. Martinez assured her. "We can just sit here together for a while. Would you like some water? Or maybe some juice?" A small nod. Progress. While another officer brought juice, David studied the girl more carefully. Her cornrows were neat but not fresh, maybe a week old. The purple beads were similar to the ones Maya had loved, but they were slightly different in style. Her clothing was clean but ill-fitting, like it had been chosen quickly without much concern for size. Dr. Martinez placed some paper and crayons on the table. "Sometimes it's easier to draw what we're feeling instead of saying it. Would you like to try that?" The girl reached tentatively for a crayon, selecting purple, Maya's favorite color. She began to draw, her movements careful and precise, just like Maya's had been. David watched as a picture emerged, a house with a fence. A rainbow arched over it. His heart stopped. The girl added details. A tall figure holding hands with a smaller one, a car in the driveway. And there, in the corner, a small rabbit with what looked like a ribbon around its neck. "That's beautiful," Dr. Martinez said. "Can you tell me about your picture?" The girl's hand trembled as she set down the crayon. She looked at David again, her eyes filling with tears. "It's okay," he whispered. "You're safe here. No one can hurt you anymore." Her lips moved again, and this time, a whisper emerged. "Daddy?" The word hung in the air like a prayer. David fought to maintain his composure, even as his heart threatened to burst. "Yes, baby girl. It's me." The girl, Maya, his Maya, began to shake, tears rolling down her cheeks. They said you didn't want me anymore, that you gave me away." "Never." David's voice broke. "I never stopped looking for you, not for one single day." Dr. Martinez watched this exchange carefully, making notes but not interrupting. Sarah, watching through the observation window, wiped tears from her own eyes. Maya's words came faster now, tumbling out between sobs. "They took me from the car. Mom tried to stop them, but the black car, they pushed us off the road, into the water." David's worst fears were confirmed. The accident hadn't been an accident at all. "I screamed for you," Maya continued, her small body shaking with the force of her tears. But they said if I didn't be quiet, they'd hurt you too. So I stopped talking. I stopped talking for a long time. David moved closer, and Maya launched herself into his arms, clinging to him like she'd never let go. He held her tight, his own, tears falling freely now. "I'm so sorry, baby girl," he whispered into her hair. "I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you. But I'm here now, and I'm never letting you go again." Dr. Martinez signaled through the window, and Sarah entered with a social worker. They needed to document everything, to build their case against the traffickers. But for now, they gave father and daughter a moment to reconnect. Maya pulled back, slightly, touching David's face as if making sure he was real. "I remembered the rainbow," she said softly. "When I was scared, I would close my eyes and think about painting it with you. They couldn't take that away." David smiled through his tears. "It's still there, on the fence, waiting for you to come home and help me repaint it." A knock at the door interrupted them. Detective Williams entered, his face grave. "David, we need to talk. The suspect, he's talking. This goes deeper than we thought." David looked at Maya, who tensed at the mention of her captor. "It's okay," he assured her. "Dr. Martinez will stay with you for a few minutes. I'll be right outside that door, and I'll come back as soon as I can." Maya nodded bravely, though she didn't let go of Mr. Hoppy. "Promise?" "Promise." David stood, every fiber of his being resistant to leaving her, even for a moment. "And Maya, I love you, more than all the colors in every rainbow." A small smile broke through her tears. "I love you too, Daddy." In the hallway, Marcus showed David a preliminary report. The suspect had cracked under questioning, revealing connections to a larger trafficking operation, the same operation that had targeted Maya 2 years ago. "They've been watching you," Marcus explained grimly. "The accident wasn't random. They chose Maya specifically because they knew you were a cop. They wanted to send a message." David's hands clenched into fists. "How many others?" "We're still getting details, but it looks like dozens of children over the past 5 years. They target families of law enforcement, using the children as leverage to keep investigations away from their operation." "Not anymore," David said, his voice hard with determination. "We shut them down, all of them." Sarah joined them, adding more details from the suspect's confession. "The guy we caught, James Wilson, he's just a transporter, but he's giving us names, locations, everything. He says he's been trying to get out. That's why he was so nervous when you pulled him over. He was taking Maya somewhere," David realized. "Where?" "According to Wilson, they were planning to move her out of the country. Maya was starting to remember things, becoming a liability. That's why they were rushing." David looked through the observation window at his daughter, who was showing Dr. Martinez another drawing. His miracle returned to him just in time. "We'll need protective custody," he said, "for both of us, until this is over." "Already arranged," Marcus assured him. "We've got a safe house ready, but David, they're going to want her to testify. She's our best witness." David watched as Maya drew what looked like another rainbow. Even after everything she'd been through, she still found beauty to create. His brave, resilient girl. "She's strong," he said softly, "stronger than any of them knew. We'll get through this together." Back in the interview room, Maya looked up as David entered. Her eyes held too much knowledge for a 9-year-old, too much pain. But there was also hope there, and love. "Daddy?" she asked. "Can we go home?" "Soon, baby girl. There are some bad people we need to stop first, but I promise you, we'll go home, and this time, I'll keep you safe." Maya nodded solemnly. "I know you will." She held up her drawing, another rainbow, but this one was different. This one had a sun breaking through storm clouds, and beneath it, 2 figures holding hands. "It's us," she explained. "After the storm." David pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. Outside, the real storm was just beginning. The investigation, the arrests, the long process of healing. But here, in this moment, holding his daughter again, David knew that no storm could tear them apart again. Because sometimes, rainbows appear not just after the storm, but during it. You just have to know where to look. And David Carter had finally found his Detective Williams spread the old case files across the conference room table. David sat among them, his coffee untouched, mind racing between the present and past. Through the window of the adjacent room, he could see Maya sleeping on the couch, Dr. Martinez keeping watch. Even in sleep, his daughter clutched Mr. Hoppy tight against her chest. "Let's go through it again," Marcus said, pulling out the accident report from 2 years ago. "Now that we know it wasn't an accident, what did we miss?" David closed his eyes, forcing himself back to that rainy afternoon. The memory was still razor-sharp, every detail etched in pain. "There was a witness," he began. "Mrs. Eleanor Washington. She lived in that blue house overlooking the bridge. She reported seeing a black SUV, but nobody followed up properly because we were focused on the recovery effort." Sarah finished, entering the room with fresh coffee. "She was the one who called 911, right?" David nodded, pulling out Mrs. Washington's original statement. His hands trembled slightly as he read her words. "I saw them force the car off the road. The black SUV. It came out of nowhere. I tried to help, but by the time I got down there..." The words transported David back to that day, to his desperate search along the riverbank. But now, with the clarity of new information, different details emerged from his memory. 2 years earlier, David stood in the rain, his uniform soaked through, scanning the churning water for any sign of Maya. Emergency vehicles crowded the bridge above, their lights reflecting off the wet pavement. "Officer Carter," a voice called out. He turned to see an elderly black woman hurrying down the slope, using her umbrella as a makeshift walking stick. "Officer Carter, you need to hear this." Mrs. Washington grabbed his arm, her eyes wide with urgency. "It wasn't just the rain. There was another vehicle, a black SUV. They forced your wife's car toward the railing. I saw them." David's training kicked in despite his panic. "Did you see the license plate? Any distinguishing features?" "Tinted windows," she said. "And there was a mark on the side, like a company logo maybe. I couldn't see it clearly in the rain, but..." A shout from the water interrupted them. The rescue team had found Leah's body. David's world narrowed to that single, devastating reality. Mrs. Washington's words about the SUV faded into the background, lost in the chaos of that moment. But she didn't give up. Over the next few weeks, she called the station repeatedly, insisting there was more to the story. David, consumed by his search for Maya, only half listened when his colleagues mentioned Mrs. Washington's calls. "She's just a kind old lady who wants to help," they said. "Grief makes people see things that aren't there, present day." "We need to talk to Mrs. Washington again," David said, standing abruptly. "She might remember more details about that SUV now that we know what to ask." Marcus nodded. "I'll send a unit to..." "No," David interrupted. "I need to do this myself. She tried to tell us the truth 2 years ago and we didn't listen. I owe her more than sending a random officer to her door." Sarah touched his arm gently. "What about Maya?" David looked through the window again. Maya had woken up and was showing Dr. Martinez another drawing. His heart clenched at the thought of leaving her, even briefly. "I'll be quick," he promised. "And she's safe here with protective custody. Right now, the best way I can help her is by finding the people who took her." The drive to Mrs. Washington's house was filled with memories. David remembered the countless times he'd patrolled this route over the past 2 years, always slowing down near the bridge, always hoping for some sign he'd missed. Mrs. Washington's blue house looked exactly the same, its neat garden and wind, chimes a stark contrast to the darkness of his memories. He knocked on the door, and after a moment, heard familiar shuffling footsteps. "Officer Carter?" Mrs. Washington's eyes widened as she opened the door. She looked older than he remembered, but her gaze was still sharp. "Lord have mercy, I heard about what happened today. Is it true? Did you find your baby girl?" David nodded, emotion making it hard to speak. "Yes, ma'am. And you were right. About everything. The accident. The SUV. It wasn't an accident at all." She ushered him inside, into a living room filled with family photos and the smell of fresh bread. "I knew it," she said, lowering herself into her favorite armchair. "I knew what I saw that day. Been praying all this time that the truth would come out." "Mrs. Washington, I need you to tell me everything you remember about that SUV. Every detail, no matter how small." She closed her eyes, thinking back. It was sleek, expensive looking. The logo on the side, I remember thinking it looked like a tree, but not quite. More like branches spreading out. And there was something else. She frowned, concentrating. The driver. When he got out to check the bridge after your wife's car went over, he had a tattoo on his neck, like yours. David's hand went to his own neck automatically, where a small caduceus marked his time as a military medic before joining the police force. A medical symbol? Similar, but different. More twisted somehow. Mrs. Washington shuddered at the memory. "I never told anyone that part because it seemed so insignificant compared to everything else happening. But David's mind was already racing. A twisted medical symbol, a tree-like logo. Pieces of a puzzle he hadn't even known he was solving started falling into place. "The man we caught today," he said slowly. He had a similar tattoo, partially covered up, in the building where they were keeping Maya. Marcus said it used to be a medical supply company. Mrs. Washington reached for his hand. "You go find them," she said firmly. "You make them pay for what they did to your family." Back at the station, David shared Mrs. Washington's information with the team. Marcus was already pulling up satellite images of properties owned by medical supply companies in the area. "Look at this," he said, pointing to his screen. "New Life Medical Solutions. Their logo matches Mrs. Washington's description. It's supposed to be a DNA helix, but it looks like a twisted tree. They went bankrupt 2 years ago, right around the time Maya was taken." Sarah leaned in, studying the image. "But their properties weren't sold. They're still listed under subsidiary companies. Perfect cover for a trafficking operation." David stared at the logo, remembering something Maya had drawn earlier. What he'd thought were just random squiggles in the background of her rainbow. But now, she was trying to tell us, he realized. In her drawings. She's been leaving us clues. He hurried to the interview room where Maya was still drawing. Dr. Martinez had been gradually helping her open up, using art therapy to unlock her memories. "Maya," David said softly, kneeling beside her. "The place where they kept you, did it have a sign outside? Maybe something that looked like this?" He sketched the New Life logo roughly on a piece of paper. Maya's crayon stopped moving. Her hand began to shake slightly, but she nodded. "Can you show me what you remember about that place?" Slowly, carefully, Maya began to draw. The building took shape under her purple crayon, a large warehouse with the twisted tree logo prominently displayed. But it was the details that caught David's attention. The security cameras positioned exactly where an 8-year-old might notice them. The pattern of windows that matched the satellite photos, and most importantly, the other children. "There. Were more kids?" David asked gently. Maya nodded again. "They kept us separated most of the time," she whispered. "But sometimes during lessons, we could see each other. They made us learn new names, new stories. Said we had to forget our old lives." David's heart broke all over again, but he pressed on. "Do you remember any of the other children? Their real names?" Maya's lower lip trembled. "Amy," she said softly. "She was there the longest. And Marcus, he was taken just before me. And baby Sophia." She stopped, tears rolling down her cheeks. David checked the missing persons database. Amy Chen, Marcus Rodriguez, Sophia Williams, all children of law enforcement officers, all declared dead after apparent accidents. They're still there, Maya said, her voice stronger now. We have to help them, Daddy. We promised we'd always be detectives together, remember? The memory hit David like a physical blow. Maya at 7, wearing his spare police badge, solemnly swearing to solve mysteries and help people. Even after everything she'd been through, that desire to help others burned bright. We'll help. Them, David promised. But I need you to be brave and tell us everything you can remember about that place. Every detail might help us save those other kids. For the next hour, Maya drew and talked, each detail adding to their understanding of the trafficking operation. The warehouse had underground levels where the children were kept. Guards rotated every 12 hours. Food came 3 times a day, always from the same local restaurant. Details a child would notice. Details that could help them plan a rescue. David watched his daughter with a mixture of pride and heartache. She was still his Maya, brave, observant, compassionate. But she'd been forced to grow up too fast, to learn survival skills no child should need. Marcus and Sarah worked quickly, cross-referencing Maya's information with their existing evidence. The operation was larger than they'd initially thought, with connections to similar cases across the country. They're going to move the other children, David realized. As soon as they know we have Maya, they'll try to clear out that warehouse. We can't go in without proper backup, Marcus warned. These people are organized, well-funded. They've managed to hide in plain sight for years. Those children have waited long enough, David countered. Maya waited long enough. We moved tonight. Sarah touched his arm. David, you're too close to this. Maybe you should... I'm going, he said firmly. I made a promise to protect those children, all of them. Maya looked up from her drawing, her eyes meeting his. In that moment, she wasn't just a victim or a witness. She was his partner, his brave girl who had survived the impossible and come back to help others. Be careful, Daddy, she said softly. They have guns in the basement, big ones. David knelt beside her. I will be, and when this is over, we'll go home and repaint that rainbow together. Deal? Maya managed a small smile. Deal. As the team began planning the raid, David couldn't help but think about all the moments that had led to this. Mrs. Washington's testimony, dismissed too quickly. Maya's careful observations during her captivity. Even his own refusal to believe she was truly gone. Sometimes the truth hides in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to emerge. And sometimes it takes a child's courage to light the way forward. Tonight, they would follow that light into darkness, carrying Maya's rainbow with them like a beacon of hope. Because every storm, no matter how long it rages, must eventually end. And somewhere in that warehouse, other children were waiting for their own rainbows to appear. The safe house was quiet, except for the gentle scratching of Maya's crayon against paper. David sat nearby, watching his daughter work through her memories the only way she knew how, through art. The walls of the small living room were already covered with her drawings, each one a piece of the puzzle they were trying to solve. Detective Marcus Williams studied the pictures from his position by the window, where he'd been standing guard for the past 3 hours. The tactical team was preparing for tonight's raid, but here, in this moment of calm before the storm, Maya's drawings commanded everyone's attention. Tell me about this one, David said softly, pointing to a new picture Maya was working on. It showed what looked like a classroom, but the windows were too high, and the children's faces all wore the same blank expression. Maya's hand trembled slightly, but she kept drawing. This is where they taught us our new stories, she explained, her voice barely above a whisper. Every day we had to practice saying our fake names and memories until they felt real. David's heart clenched, but he kept his voice steady. What did they make you say? They said my name was Sarah Johnson, Maya continued, switching to a darker, purple crayon. They said my real parents didn't want me anymore, that they'd sold me because they needed money. Her lower lip trembled. But I knew it wasn't true. I remembered the rainbow fence. David reached out slowly, giving Maya time to pull away if she wanted. But she leaned into his touch, letting him stroke her braids like he used to do when she was smaller. The rainbow fence? Dr. Martinez prompted gently from her seat across the room. She'd been documenting Maya's statements, building their case against the traffickers piece by piece. Maya nodded, adding more details to her drawing. When I was scared, or when they were being mean, I would close my eyes and think about painting the rainbow with Daddy. They couldn't take that memory away, no matter how hard they tried. Sarah Thompson entered the safe house, carrying a file box. Her eyes were red-rimmed from lack of sleep, but there was determination in her stride. Maya, honey, I brought something that might help. Would you like to see some pictures of your old room? Maya looked to David first, seeking reassurance. When he nodded encouragingly, she set down her crayons. Sarah opened the box, pulling out photographs they'd taken during the original investigation. Maya's bedroom exactly as she'd left it that rainy morning 2 years ago. Look, Sarah said, laying out the photos. Here's your bookshelf with all your favorite stories, and your art supplies on the desk. Do you remember the name of this stuffed elephant? Maya's fingers traced the photograph. Ellie, she said softly. Because Daddy said she had big ears like an elephant lady he met in Africa when he was in the army. David felt tears prick his eyes. They hadn't prompted her with that detail. It was a pure memory, untainted by suggestion or coaching. Maya was still in there, fighting her way back through the layers of trauma and forced forgetting. That's right, baby girl, he managed. Ellie's still there, waiting for you to come home. Maya picked up another photograph, this one showing her and David at her 7th birthday party. Her face lit up with recognition. This was when you got me the art set, and Mom made the cake with purple frosting, but it got all melty because it was so hot outside. Dr. Martinez made notes, but her expression was pleased. Each spontaneous memory was a sign that Maya's real identity had remained intact beneath the surface, resistant to her captor's attempts to erase it. Maya, the doctor said carefully, can you tell me about the day you were taken? Only if you feel ready. The light in Maya's eyes dimmed slightly, but she straightened her shoulders, a gesture so like her mother that it made David's chest ache. We were going to Grandma's house, she began. Mom was singing along with the radio. It was that song about the sunshine, the one she always played. Ain't No Sunshine, David supplied softly. Bill Withers. It was her favorite. Maya nodded. The black car came up behind us really fast. Mom said something was wrong, that they were too close. Then, she stopped, her hands clenching in her lap. It's okay, Dr. Martinez assured her. Take your time. They hit us, Maya continued, her voice smaller now. The car spun around and around. Mom was screaming, trying to reach back to me. Then we hit the bridge rail, and everything went sideways. Tears rolled down her cheeks. The water was so cold. David moved closer, offering comfort without crowding her. Maya leaned into him, drawing strength from his presence. Someone pulled me out, she said. Not Mom. A man with the twisted tree on his jacket. He carried me to the black car, and another man said. She swallowed hard. He said to make it look like an accident. Marcus stopped his pacing by the window. Maya, this is very important. Did you hear them use any names? Maya closed her eyes, concentrating. The man who pulled me out. The others called him Doc. And there was another name, Jensen. The man who gave the orders. The others seemed scared of him. Sarah's head snapped up. Jensen? As in Robert? Jensen, the former CEO of New Life Medical Solutions? Has to be, Marcus said grimly. The company went bankrupt right after Maya's kidnapping, but Jensen disappeared with millions in company funds. We could never prove where the money went. Now we know, David said, his voice hard. He used it to set up his trafficking operation, targeting the children of law enforcement officers, the very people who might investigate him. Maya tugged at David's sleeve. Daddy, there's something else. Something I remembered when I saw the pictures of my room. What is it, baby girl? The day before the bridge, I saw the black car. It was parked across the street from our house. I thought it was weird because the windows were so dark, but I didn't tell anyone." Her voice cracked. "If I had told you..." "No," David said firmly. "This was not your fault. None of it was your fault. You were just a little girl, and these were very bad people who had been planning this for a long time." Dr. Martinez leaned forward. "Maya, you're being so brave telling us all this. Can you think of anything else about the place where they kept you? Anything that might help us find the other children?" Maya picked up her crayons again, starting a new drawing. The basement had special doors, heavy ones like in a hospital, and there were cameras everywhere. But she paused, adding a detail to her picture. There was a blind spot behind the big freezer in the kitchen. That's where Amy and I would pass notes sometimes. "How many guards usually worked at night?" Marcus asked. "4 inside, 2 outside," Maya said with the precise recall of someone who'd spent months observing their captors. "They changed places every 12 hours when the big church bells rang." Sarah checked her notes. "St. Michael's Cathedral is 6 blocks from the warehouse. Their bells ring at 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. "The night guards were nicer," Maya continued. "Especially one lady. She used to sneak us extra food sometimes. She had a daughter my age." She looked up at David. "I think she wanted to help us, but she was scared too." David shared a look with Marcus. A sympathetic guard could be valuable for the raid they were planning. "Do you remember her name, Maya?" "Miss Angela," but the others called her Angie. Maya added more details to her drawing. A figure wearing a security uniform standing near a door. "She works on Mondays and Wednesdays. Today's Wednesday." The intelligence Maya was providing was invaluable, but David could see she was getting tired. The emotional toll of remembering, of reliving these traumatic moments, was starting to show in the droop of her shoulders and the tremor in her hands. "I think that's enough for now," he said, smoothing a hand over her braids. "You've helped us so much, Maya. Why don't you try to get some rest?" But Maya shook her head stubbornly. "I want to help find the others. Amy said she'd never forget. Me, just like I never forgot you. I promised her we'd get out together." Dr. Martinez intervened gently. "Maya, you are helping. Every detail you remember brings us closer to rescuing your friends. But your father's right. You need to rest. Your brain needs time to process all these memories." Maya's resistance crumbled as exhaustion won out. She curled up on the couch, still clutching Mr. Hoppy. "Daddy, will you stay?" "Of course, baby girl. I'm not going anywhere." As Maya drifted off to sleep, the adults gathered in the kitchen to plan. Marcus spread out satellite photos of the warehouse, while Sarah overlaid them with Maya's detailed drawings of the interior. "The high raid team will be ready by nightfall," Marcus said quietly. "Maya's information about the guard shifts and security systems is exactly what we needed." David studied the plans, his jaw tight. "Jensen will be expecting us. As soon as our guy in custody missed his check-in, they would have known something was wrong. That's why we moved tonight," Sarah insisted, "before they have time to relocate the other children." "David," Marcus said carefully, "you know you can't be part of the tactical team. You're too close to this." "Those are my daughter's friends in there," David argued. "Children who've been through the same hell she has. I need to help get them out." "And you will," Sarah assured him. "But your place is here, protecting Maya. She needs you more than ever right now." David wanted to protest, but he knew they were right. Looking at his sleeping daughter, he remembered her words about the day she was taken, how she'd seen the black car but been too afraid to tell anyone. She'd carried that guilt for 2 years, just as he'd carried the guilt of not being there to protect her. "Jensen," he said finally, "when you find him, when this is all over, I want 5 minutes alone with him." Marcus and Sarah exchanged looks but didn't argue. They understood the depth of a father's need for justice, for answers. Maya stirred, in her sleep, murmuring something about rainbows. David moved back to the couch, gently stroking her hair until she settled. In sleep, she looked so much like the little girl in his memories, the one who loved to paint and dance and solve mysteries with her daddy, but she wasn't that innocent child anymore. The traffickers had tried to erase Maya Carter, to replace her with Sarah Johnson, but they had failed. His daughter's spirit had been too strong, her memories of love and family too deeply rooted to be destroyed. Now, as the sun began to set, and the raid teams took their positions around the warehouse, David made a silent promise, not just to Maya, but to all the children still trapped inside. The storm that had torn his family apart was finally breaking, and when it cleared, there would be more than one rainbow waiting on the other side. Because sometimes the bravest thing a father can do is let others fight while he stays behind to guard what matters most. And right now, curled up on a safe house couch with her stuffed rabbit, what mattered most was finally home. The rainbow fence could wait. The paint wouldn't dry in the rain anyway. Night fell over the city like a heavy curtain. Detective Marcus Williams watched the warehouse through his tactical binoculars, counting guards and noting their positions. Everything matched Maya's description perfectly. 4 inside, 2 outside, just as she'd said. The church bells had rung at 6, marking the shift change, and now they were just waiting for the signal. In the command vehicle, Sarah Thompson, coordinated with SWAT teams positioned around the perimeter. All units, be advised, we have confirmation of multiple children inside. Priority 1 is securing their safety. And remember, these guys are organized. They've managed to hide in plain sight for years. Back at the safe house, David paced restlessly, torn between his duty as a father and his instinct as a cop. Maya had finally fallen into a deep sleep, exhausted from the emotional toll of remembering. Dr. Martinez watched over her while David listened to the operation unfold through his earpiece. Movement at the southeast entrance. Marcus's voice crackled through the comm. Guard matching Angela Martinez's description. She's alone. Sarah's response was immediate. Team 2, move to intercept. Remember, she might be sympathetic to the children. Approach with caution. David watched the tactical feed on a secure laptop, his heart racing as he saw the teams converge on the day guard. Angela raised her hands immediately, offering no resistance. Within minutes, she was providing crucial last-minute intelligence about the interior layout and the children's locations. 6 children currently held in the lower level, she reported, her voice shaking. Jensen's been making arrangements to move them tonight. He's inside right now, destroying evidence. Marcus's voice was hard. How many armed personnel? 3. On the main floor, all ex-military. 2 more in the basement with the kids. Jensen has his own security detail, at least 4 men. Angela wiped tears from her eyes. I wanted to help them sooner, but they threatened my daughter. You're helping them now, Sarah assured her. That's what matters. The raid began, with precise coordination. Flashbangs at multiple entry points, SWAT teams breaching simultaneously. David watched it unfold on the laptop screen, his fingers digging into his palms. The first resistance came from the main floor guards. Gunfire erupted, but the SWAT team's superior position and numbers quickly overwhelmed them. 2 surrendered. 1 tried to fight and was taken down with non-lethal force. Main floor secure, came the report. Moving to the lower level. In the safe house, Maya stirred in her sleep, as if sensing the moment's intensity. David moved to her side, gently stroking her braids. It's okay, baby girl. Everything's going to be okay. The basement breach was more complicated. The heavy hospital-style doors Maya had described required specialized equipment to breach. Precious minutes ticked by as the teams worked to gain entry. Contact! The sharp report came through David's earpiece. 2 hostiles, armed, children in sight. More gunfire, more shouts. David's heart hammered in his chest as he listened, imagining those frightened children caught in the crossfire, but the SWAT team had trained for exactly this scenario. Within moments, both guards were subdued. 6 children secured, came the blessed report. All appear unharmed, medical team moving in. David closed his eyes in relief, but it wasn't over. Yet, Jensen was still unaccounted for, along with his personal security team. Movement on the 2nd floor. Marcus's voice was urgent. Multiple targets heading for the roof. They've got a helicopter incoming. Sarah's commands were swift and decisive. Team 3, cut off their escape route. Air support, intercept that helicopter. Do not let Jensen get away. The fight that followed was intense but brief. Jensen's security team was professional and well-armed, but they were outnumbered and surrounded. One by one, they surrendered, but Jensen himself remained elusive. Basement clear. First floor clear. Second floor clear. Roof clear. Where is he? Sarah demanded. Search every room, every closet, every air duct if you have to. He does not leave this building. Angela, still in custody but cooperating, spoke up. There's a hidden room behind the morgue freezer in the basement. It's where he keeps his files. Marcus led the team back down, following Angela's directions. The freezer moved aside to reveal a reinforced door with a keypad lock. Stand back, the breaching specialist ordered, setting up his equipment. The door blew inward with a controlled explosion. And there, amid stacks of files and computers, stood Robert Jensen, the man who had orchestrated the kidnapping of countless children, who had tried to destroy David's family. It's over, Jensen, Marcus declared, weapon trained. On the man's chest, Jensen's smile was cold, professional. He raised his hand slowly, showing no fear. Is it? Do you really think I'm the only one running operations like this? There will always be a market for... A single shot rang out. Jensen stumbled back, red blooming across his shoulder. Behind him, trembling but determined, stood a woman in a security uniform. Another guard who, like Angela, had finally found her courage. That's for all the children, she said, dropping her weapon and raising her hands. I'm done being afraid. Within hours, the warehouse was swarming with FBI agents, forensic teams, and child welfare specialists. The 6 rescued children were reunited with families who had thought them dead. Years of files and records were seized, revealing a network that stretched across multiple states. David listened to it all through his earpiece, holding Maya's hand as she slept. When she woke, he would tell her that her friends were safe, that Amy and the others were going home just like she had. But for now, he let her rest, watching the sunrise paint the sky in colors that promised a new beginning. The door opened quietly, and Sarah entered. She looked exhausted, but triumphant. We got them all, David. Jensen, his entire operation, and we found evidence linking them to dozens of other kidnappings. The FBI's already moving on locations in 3 other states. And the children? David asked softly, not wanting to wake Maya. All safe. Being checked out at the hospital, but no serious physical injuries. They're asking about Maya, especially Amy. She never stopped believing Maya would find a way to help them. David smiled down at his sleeping daughter. She's her mother's daughter. Leah never gave up on anything either. Sarah hesitated, then pulled out her phone. There's something else. In Jensen's files, we found video from the day of the accident. It shows... She swallowed hard. It shows Leah fighting them, David. Even after the car went into the water, she fought to protect Maya. She died a hero. Tears slid down David's cheeks as he watched the footage. His beautiful, fierce Leah, using her last moments to give their daughter a chance at survival. She always said she'd do anything for Maya. There's more, Sarah continued. Jensen kept detailed records. The accident wasn't random. They specifically targeted your family because you were getting close to exposing their operation. David frowned. What do you mean? I wasn't investigating anything related to trafficking back then. Not directly, no. But that case you were working on, about prescription drug theft from hospitals? Turns out New Life Medical Solutions was using those same supply routes to transport children. Your investigation was threatening their entire network. The realization hit David like a physical blow. All this time, he'd blamed himself for not being there that day, for working too many hours, for failing to protect his family. But the truth was, he had been protecting people, just like he'd promised Maya he would. The traffickers had turned that dedication into a weapon against him. Maya stirred, her eyes fluttering open. Daddy, is it over? David gathered her close. breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. "Yes, baby girl. The bad people can't hurt anyone anymore. Your friends are safe. Amy too. Amy too. They're all going home to their families." Maya was quiet for a moment, processing this. "Can we go home now? To our house with the rainbow fence?" "Soon," David promised. "First, the doctors need to check you out, make sure you're okay. And there will be some people who need to ask you questions about what happened. But you'll stay with me?" "Every second," David assured her. "I'm never letting you out of my sight again." Dr. Martinez approached gently. "Maya, would you like to talk to Amy? She's asking about you." Maya's face lit up. "Can I?" Sarah held out her phone, where Amy's face appeared on a video call. The two girls stared at each other for a long moment before breaking into tears and laughter. "You did it," Amy said, wiping her eyes. "You found your dad and came back for us just like you promised." "I never forgot," Maya replied. "Just like you never forgot me." David watched their reunion with a full heart. These children had formed their own family in captivity, supporting each other through the darkest of times. Their bonds would never be broken, even as they returned to their original families. Later that day, as Maya slept in a hospital bed after her examination, David finally allowed himself to process everything that had happened. The truth about Leah's death, the extent of Jensen's operation, the courage of women like Angela who had finally stood up against evil. It was almost too much to take in. Marcus joined him in the hospital corridor, holding 2 cups of coffee. "The FBI just finished their preliminary review of Jensen's files. You were right. They were specifically targeting law enforcement families, using our children as insurance against investigation." David took the coffee, but didn't drink it. "How many?" "Over the past 5 years, at least 30 families, all made to look like accidents or random tragedies." Marcus's voice was heavy with anger and grief. "But thanks to Maya, thanks to her strength and her memory, we can give them all justice now. She never stopped fighting," David said softly. "Even when they tried to make her forget who she was, she held on to her memories. On to love. Like father, like daughter," Marcus replied. "You never stopped fighting either." Through the hospital room window, David watched Maya sleep peacefully for the first time in 2 years. Tomorrow would bring more questions, more challenges, more healing to be done. But for now, in this moment, he allowed himself to feel something he'd almost forgotten. Hope. Because sometimes justice comes not in the form we expect, but in the courage of a child who refuses to forget, in the sacrifice of a mother who dies, protecting her daughter, in the determination of those who choose to stand against evil when it would be easier to look away. And sometimes, just sometimes, it comes in the form of a rainbow painted on a fence, a symbol of love that no amount of darkness could erase. The first week home was the hardest. Maya would wake up screaming in the middle of the night, convinced she was back in that basement. David would find her huddled in corners, clutching Mr. Hoppy, her eyes wide with fear until she remembered where she was. Home, safe, with her father. Dr. Martinez had warned them this would happen. "Recovery isn't linear," she'd explained. "There will be good days and bad days. The important thing is to establish routines, create new positive memories while acknowledging the trauma." So they developed rituals. Every morning, they would sit together on the back porch, watching the sunrise while Maya drew in her sketchbook. Sometimes she drew rainbows, sometimes darker things, the warehouse, the faces of her captors. David learned to let her express whatever she needed to, offering quiet support without pushing. "Daddy?" Maya asked one morning, her crayon moving carefully across the paper. "Can we paint the fence today?" The old rainbow had faded almost completely, worn away by 2 years of sun and rain. David had never been able to paint over it. But now, looking at his daughter's hopeful face, he understood it was time for a new beginning. "Of course, baby girl. What colors should we use?" Maya's smile was small, but genuine. All of them. And maybe, she hesitated, maybe we could add some stars this time. For Mom? David's heart squeezed. I think that's a beautiful idea. They worked together under the warm sun, just like they used to. Maya was more careful now, more deliberate in her movements, but her artistic eye was as sharp as ever. As they painted, David noticed her humming softly. Ain't No Sunshine, her mother's favorite song. Mom used to say that rainbows are God's way of keeping promises, Maya said, adding another star to their mural. Do you think she knows I'm home? David set down his brush, turning to face his daughter. I know she does, baby. She never stopped watching over you. Just like I never stopped looking. Maya leaned into his embrace, paint-stained hands clutching his shirt. I was so scared I'd forget everything. They kept telling me you didn't want me anymore, that I had to be Sarah now. But I would think about this fence, about painting with you, and I knew they were lying. Inside the house, the phone rang. It was Amy's mother, arranging another playdate. The girls had been inseparable since their rescue, their shared experience creating a bond that helped them both heal. The therapists encouraged these meetings, saying it was important for the children to know they weren't alone. Amy's coming over? Maya's face lit up when David told her. Can we show her our new rainbow? Of course, and maybe she'd like to add something to it too. Maya nodded enthusiastically. She's really good at painting butterflies, and Marcus does awesome dragons. Maybe he can come over sometime too. David marveled at his daughter's resilience. Despite everything she'd been through, her capacity for joy and friendship remained intact. The trafficking ring had tried to break these children's spirits, to erase their identities, but they had underestimated the strength of young hearts. Later that afternoon, Amy arrived with her mother. The two girls immediately ran to the backyard, eager to work on the fence. David watched them through the kitchen window while he talked with Amy's mom, Sharon. The nightmares are getting better, Sharon said, cradling her coffee cup. But sometimes she still can't sleep unless all the lights are on. The therapist says it's normal, that it'll take time. David nodded. Maya's the same. But she's talking. More now, expressing her feelings through her art. Dr. Martinez says that's a good sign. Have you heard about the support group they're starting for all the families affected by Jensen's operation? Sarah mentioned it. I think it would be good for Maya to see other families healing together. Outside, the girls were adding butterflies to the rainbow, their laughter carrying through the open window. It was a sound David had feared he'd never hear again. The healing wasn't just for the children. David had his own therapy sessions, working through his guilt and grief. He'd learned that being strong for Maya didn't mean hiding his own pain. It meant showing her that it was okay to feel, to cry, to remember. One evening, as they sorted through old photographs for a memory book Dr. Martinez had suggested, Maya found a picture of Leah holding her as a baby. I miss Mom, she said softly. Sometimes I feel bad because I can't remember exactly what her voice sounded like anymore. David pulled her close. Want to know a secret? I have some videos of her on my old phone. Would you like to watch them together? Maya's eyes widened. Yes, please. They spent the next hour watching clips of Leah dancing in the kitchen, reading bedtime stories, teaching Maya to make her famous chocolate chip cookies. Maya absorbed every moment, occasionally asking questions about memories that were still hazy. She was so pretty, Maya said, touching the screen gently. And brave. Sarah told me. She told me Mom fought really hard to protect me. David's throat tightened. She did. Your mom was the bravest person I've ever known, and you're just like her. Strong, determined, full of love. The next day brought another milestone. Maya's grandparents, Leah's parents, were coming to visit. They had flown in as soon as they heard about Maya's rescue, but the doctors had advised giving her time to adjust before overwhelming her with too many reunions. Maya was nervous, pacing the living room while they waited. What if they don't recognize me? What if I don't remember them right? They're your grandparents, baby girl. They love you no matter what. And it's okay if some memories are fuzzy. We can make new ones together. The reunion was tearful, but beautiful. Grandma Jean couldn't stop hugging Maya, while Grandpa Tom kept wiping his eyes, his big frame shaking with emotion. They had brought Maya's baby albums, and soon the family was gathered on the couch, sharing stories and memories. "Look at this one," Grandma Jean said, pointing to a photo of toddler Maya covered in paint. "You always were our little artist. Even then, you loved making beautiful things." Maya snuggled between her grandparents, soaking in their love and presence. For the first time since coming home, she seemed completely relaxed, completely present in the moment. That night, after her grandparents had gone to their hotel, Maya asked to sleep in her old room. She had been staying in David's room since their return, too afraid to be alone. But something about reconnecting with her extended family had given her new strength. "Are you sure?" David asked, trying to hide his concern. Maya nodded. "I want to try, but could you leave the hall light on and maybe check on me sometimes?" "Of course, baby girl. I'll be right down the hall if you need me." David helped her arrange her stuffed animals, Mr. Hoppy in his place of honor beside her pillow, joined now by new friends given by Amy and the other rescued children. Each toy represented a connection, a thread of support in the tapestry of Maya's recovery. As he tucked her in, Maya grabbed his hand. "Daddy, thank you for not forgetting me. I could never forget you, Maya. You're my heart." He stayed until she fell asleep, then quietly made his way to the kitchen. Sarah had dropped off more files about Jensen's operation, evidence that would ensure he and his accomplices never hurt another child. David had joined a task force dedicated to identifying and preventing similar trafficking operations, turning his pain into purpose. The next morning, David woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of quiet humming. He found Maya in the kitchen, attempting to make breakfast. "I wanted to surprise you," she said, gesturing proudly to the slightly burnt toast and somewhat runny eggs. "Mom used to make you breakfast sometimes, remember?" David's heart swelled. "I remember, and this looks delicious." They ate together, Maya chattering about her plans for the day. She wanted to add more to the rainbow fence, maybe invite some of the other kids over to help. The mural had become a symbol of healing not just for Maya, but for all the children rescued from Jensen's operation. Later that morning, Dr. Martinez arrived for Maya's therapy session. These sessions sometimes happened at home now, part of creating a safe, comfortable environment for healing. "I brought something special today," the doctor said, pulling out a large scrapbook. "The other children have been working on this together, a story of survival and friendship." Maya opened the book carefully. Inside were drawings, poems, and messages from each of the rescued children. Amy had drawn their group surrounded by protective angels. Marcus had written about their secret, language of taps and whispers that helped them stay strong. Each page was a testament to their unbreakable spirit. "Can I add something?" Maya asked, already reaching for her art supplies. "Of course. What would you like to share?" Maya thought for a moment, then began to draw. She created a beautiful scene. The rainbow fence, but this time with all her friends standing before it, holding hands. Above them, she drew a woman with a gentle smile, watching over them. "That's Mom," she explained. "She protected me, and now she protects all of us." Dr. Martinez smiled warmly. "That's beautiful, Maya. Would you like to tell me more about what this picture means to you?" As Maya explained her drawing, David stepped out onto the porch, giving them privacy. The morning sun was warm on his face, and somewhere in the distance, church bells rang. But unlike that terrible day 2 years ago, these bells didn't signal loss or separation. They marked another day of healing, of family, of love winning over darkness. The rainbow fence gleamed with fresh paint, its colors bold and bright against the weathered wood. Maya had insisted on making this one bigger, brighter than the original. "Because our family is bigger now," she'd explained, referring to the other survivors and their families who had become part of their support network. David's phone buzzed with a message from Sarah. Another trafficking ring had been identified and shut down, thanks to information from Jensen's files. More children would be going home to their families. More rainbows would be painted. Inside, he could hear Maya's voice rising and falling as she shared her story with Dr. Martinez. His daughter's journey of healing was far from over, but she was no longer walking it alone. She had her father, her friends, her extended family of survivors, and the memory of her mother's love to light the way. And sometimes, in quiet moments like this, David could almost hear Leah's voice in the wind, singing softly about sunshine and love and the power of never giving up. Because that's what this story was really about. Not just the darkness that had tried to tear them apart, but the light that had guided them back together. A light that shone in Maya's art, in her friendships, in her courage to face each new day. A light that promised, like the rainbow on their fence, that after every storm, hope remains, and love, true love, never forgets. The ocean breeze carried, the scent of salt and freedom as David watched Maya run along the shoreline. 6 months had passed since her rescue, and today marked a special milestone, their first family vacation since reuniting. The beach had been Maya's choice, a dream she'd held on to during her darkest days in captivity. "Daddy, look," Maya called out, holding up a perfect spiral seashell. Her braids danced in the wind, purple beads catching the morning light. "It's the same color as Mom's favorite dress." David joined her at the water's edge, examining her find. The shell was indeed a beautiful shade of deep purple. "It's perfect, baby girl. Should we add it to your collection?" Maya nodded enthusiastically. She'd been gathering shells all morning, carefully selecting each one for the memory box they were creating together. A suggestion from Dr. Martinez to help Maya process and preserve both old and new memories. "Can we build our sandcastle now?" she asked, already reaching for the bucket and shovel they'd brought. "Amy showed me a picture of the one she made at her beach. I bet we can make an even bigger one." David smiled at his daughter's competitive spirit. The friendship between the rescued children had only grown stronger over the past months. They supported each other through therapy, celebrated each other's victories, and understood each other in ways no one else could. They worked together on the sandcastle, Maya directing the construction with an artist's eye for detail. She'd recovered much of her natural confidence, though there were still moments when shadows crossed her face, when memories threatened to overwhelm her. "We need a flag," she declared, studying their creation. "And a moat with a drawbridge, like in the stories Mom used to read me." David helped her craft a small flag from a piece of driftwood and Maya's purple hair ribbon. As they dug the moat, other beachgoers smiled at their project, some stopping to compliment Maya's architectural vision. "You know what this castle needs?" David suggested. "A rainbow gate." Maya's face lit up. She began carefully arranging different colored shells in an arc over the castle's entrance. "And stars," she added, placing tiny white shells in the sand sky above their creation. "For Mom, and for all the other moms and dads who never stopped looking for their kids." The depth of her understanding sometimes took David's breath away. At 9 years old, Maya carried wisdom beyond her years, hard-won through experiences no child should have to endure. Yet she had emerged not just surviving, but determined to help others. They spent the morning adding details to their castle, taking breaks to splash in the waves or hunt for more shells. Maya's laughter, carried on the ocean breeze, was the sweetest sound David had ever heard. Around noon, they spotted familiar faces approaching along the beach. Amy and her parents had driven down to surprise them, carrying a picnic basket and beach toys. "Maya," Amy called out, running to hug her friend. The girls immediately began chattering about their castles, comparing techniques and planning joint construction projects. Sharon, Amy's mother, settled beside David on the beach blanket. "How's she doing?" "Better every day," David replied, watching the girls wade into the shallow water. "The nightmares are less frequent now. She's talking more about her experiences processing things in her own way." "Same with Amy. The therapist says their friendship has been crucial to their recovery. They understand each other in ways we can't." The girls were now collecting shells together, their heads bent in serious consultation over each find. Their shared trauma had forged a bond that went beyond ordinary friendship. They were sisters in survival. "Did you hear about the new legislation?" Sharon asked quietly. "They're calling it the Rainbow Law. Increased funding for anti-trafficking task forces, better support for survivors and their families." David nodded. He'd been consulting on the bill, sharing insights from both his police experience and personal journey. Maya's testimony really moved the committee. 9 years old and she's already changing the world. The afternoon passed in a blur of sandcastles, swimming, and shared stories. As the sun began to set, the families gathered for a special ceremony Maya had planned. Each person held a small paper boat containing a candle. Maya had decorated them with messages of hope and healing, written in her careful handwriting. "Mom always said that love is like a light," Maya explained, helping Amy light her candle. "It shows us the way home, no matter how dark it gets." They released the boats into the gentle waves, watching as the tiny flames danced across the darkening water. Maya squeezed David's hand as they watched their lights join the reflecting stars. "I think Mom would be proud of us," she said softly. "She is, baby girl, every single day." Later that evening, after Amy's family had left and Maya had showered away the sand and salt, they sat on their hotel balcony. Maya was drawing in her sketchbook, no longer just rainbows, but scenes of hope and healing that she shared with other recovering children. "Daddy?" she asked, not looking up from her drawing. "Can I tell you something?" "Always, baby girl. Sometimes. Sometimes I still get scared. Not just about the bad people, but about everything changing again. About losing you." David moved his chair closer, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "That's normal, Maya. Fear is our brain's way of trying to protect us. But you know what? What? Every time you feel scared, but choose to be brave anyway, like coming to the beach today, or helping other kids by sharing your story, you're winning. You're showing fear that it can't control you anymore." Maya considered this, adding another star to her drawing. "Like Mom did, when she fought to protect me?" "Exactly like that. And I promise you, Maya, nothing will ever separate us again. We're stronger now, wiser, and we're not alone." As if to prove his point, Maya's phone chimed with a message from Amy. A photo of their candle boats joining the horizon, with the caption, "Sisters Forever." Maya smiled, sending back a row of heart emojis. Then she turned to a fresh page in her sketchbook and began to draw something new. A scene of their day at the beach, but with an addition that made David's heart swell. In the sky above the ocean, she drew Leah as an angel, watching over their sandcastle kingdom. "Do you think we could come back here next year?" Maya asked, adding details to her drawing. "Maybe invite all the other kids and their families too?" "I think that's a wonderful idea. We could make it a tradition, a celebration of survival and new beginnings." Maya nodded enthusiastically. "We could build a huge sandcastle together, with rainbows and stars and space for everyone's special memories." David marveled at his daughter's ability to transform her pain into purpose, her trauma into triumph. She had become a beacon of hope for other survivors, showing them that it was possible to reclaim joy without forgetting the lessons of the dark times. The next morning, their last day at the beach, they rose early to watch the sunrise. Maya insisted on bringing her art supplies, determined to capture the moment in color and light. As the sky transformed from inky black to brilliant gold, David watched his daughter work. Her face was peaceful, focused, alive with creative energy. She was no longer the frightened girl in the back of that car, nor the silent prisoner in Jensen's warehouse. She was Maya Carter, artist, survivor, warrior of light. "Almost done," she announced, adding final touches to her sunrise painting. "Look, Daddy, I put our whole family in it." The painting showed the beach at dawn, but Maya had added something special. Along the shore stood a line of people, not just her and David, but Amy and her parents, the other rescued children and their families, Dr. Martinez, Sarah, Marcus, and all the others who had helped bring them home. And above them all, written, in clouds tinged with purple and gold, "Love never forgets." "It's beautiful, Maya," David said, his voice thick with emotion. "Just like you." Maya set down her brush, leaning into her father's embrace. "I'm glad we came here, Daddy. The ocean makes me feel free, like nothing bad can reach us." "Nothing bad will reach us," David promised. "But even if storms come again, we know how to weather them now. Together." They spent their final hours on the beach building one last sandcastle, this one adorned with shells and feathers and tiny flags made from Maya's drawings. Each decoration represented a milestone in their journey of healing. The day Maya first slept through the night, her first laugh after coming home, the first time she felt strong enough to share her story with other survivors. As they packed up to leave, Maya insisted on taking one last walk along the shore. She carried Mr. Hoppy, his worn fur now adorned with a new purple ribbon to match her beads. "You know what, Daddy?" she said, watching the waves chase their footprints away. "I think this is my favorite place now. It's like the ocean understands." "Understands what, baby girl?" "That sometimes things get washed away, but they can also come back different. Better, maybe. Like shells that get smoothed by the waves until they're perfect for holding." David looked at his daughter in wonder. "When did you get so wise?" Maya grinned, a flash of her old mischief lighting up her face. "Must be all those therapy sessions. Dr. Martinez says I'm very in something with my feelings." "In touch," David laughed. "And she's right. You've worked so hard to heal, Maya. I'm so proud of you." They reached the spot where they'd launched their candle boats the night before. Maya knelt in the sand, pulling something from her pocket. A small purple shell she'd saved from their first day. "This one's for Mom," she said, placing it carefully at the water's edge. "So she knows we're okay now. Different, but okay." David watched as the next wave gently carried the shell out. To sea, Maya's hand found his, warm and solid and real. "Ready to go home?" he asked. Maya took one last look at the ocean, at the endless horizon where sea met sky. "Yeah," she said softly. "But can we come back soon? I want to show the other kids how to build proper sandcastles." "Of course we can. This is our place now, where the rainbows meet the sea." They walked back to the car together, leaving their footprints in the sand for the tide to smooth away. But they carried with them something the waves couldn't erase: new memories, new strength, new hope for all the tomorrows yet to come. Because sometimes the greatest act of courage is not the dramatic rescue or the final battle. Sometimes it's simply choosing to begin again, to build sandcastles where shadows once stood, to paint rainbows over the scars of storms. And Maya Carter, with her father by her side and her mother's love shining down from the stars, was ready to paint the biggest, brightest rainbow of all, the one that led not just to home, but to healing, to hope, to a future as limitless as the horizon before them. What would you do if you discovered someone you loved wasn't really lost, just waiting to be found? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful true stories of love, loss, and redemption. Turn on notifications so you never miss another story that might just change the way you see the world.